We have this notion of law today. It's really a modern notion we got in the 1960s, that it's a kind of software program, that you detail all the conditions. Whenever a new set of facts comes in, you plug it into the legal system, and the answer comes out. Well, life's too complicated for that. The complex shapes of every human choice, whether it's how a teacher runs a classroom or how you stop pollution, never fit into the square legal holes. It doesn't matter how many legal holes you have, life is more complicated than that. And so as a result, people are frustrated all day long trying to do what they know is the right thing, find themselves running into requirements that don't make any sense. They are told not to be reasonable, but simply to comply.
Now, what's the way out?
Well, the way out is among other things, real leadership. And by real leadership, I mean something that we really haven't seen in the last few decades, which is someone standing up to the system, to all the special interests. I'm amused by all of these educational reforms that come out that always have a suitably diverse group on the board of the reform. They'll have somebody from the unions and every ethnic group and academics and the like, and they always come out with some, I think the last one was we need better credentials for teachers. One before that was that we needed a national curriculum, as if reading, writing, and arithmetic were not fairly basic. Maybe it can be figured out by the local schools. What they're all missing is, and what none of them ever recommends, is a system in which the people within it can actually take responsibility for the results within it. I mean, anybody who's run a school knows that there's not one way to teach a classroom. It's this curious combination of inspiration and idiosyncrasy, and depends on the kids, depends on the teacher, depends on the other teachers, depends on the neighborhood. And you need for people to use all that's within them to bring out interest and spark learning. Instead, what we do is impose these reformers impose more requirements. It doesn't take very much bureaucracy to kill that little spark plug that is needed inside each person in that system to be creative.
Yes, but make the step, take that step, and then members of your profession, the legal profession, come along and sue, because there will be still some provision of the law somewhere that to which they can use to take exception to what the responsible person does.
We've elevated law to a place where it cannot be and survive. We allowed in Boston last year, there was a lawsuit by a mother over a disagreement between the two 3-year-olds in the sandbox. And a judge actually granted the injunction against one child going to the sandbox. I mean, that's absurd. Law shouldn't resolve that. The mother who didn't like what was going on should have just left.
Yes, but wait a minute. You say law shouldn't resolve that. But it wasn't the law. It was a responsible person in the person of a judge.
Okay.
Now, how do we, at what level do we make these decisions?
Well, at every level. But let's talk about judges for a second, because judges have the same infection has destroyed what it means to be a judge in this country. And the result is that Americans believe, correctly in my view, that there's no institution above them that sees it as their job to safeguard the reasonableness of their decisions. What happens today when you go to a judge is the judge, most judges, act like a referee, because they see their job in this new legal system to let one side argue and then let the other side argue, like the O.J. Simpson case or whatever, and then to throw it at the jury. Well, that isn't the only job of a judge. The job of a judge, if you read Justice Cardozo or the old greats, is to, among other things, set the outer boundaries of community mores. If somebody goes in a say a car wreck, and says, I want $100 million for pain and suffering because I was injured and in the hospital for 4 weeks, a judge ought to say, wait a minute, that's way outside the boundaries of what is reasonable in our society today. I'm not allowing you to bring that claim.
And then there will be an appeal, and he will be castigated for abusing his authority, right?
But that's because all the judges, both him and the appellate judges above him, don't acknowledge that judges need to draw those boundaries. And so, in fact, I'm going around talking. I've talked to a quarter of the federal judges, and I've talked to all the chief judges of the states. And last week, I was talking to all the California presiding judges. I'm talking to judges precisely on this point. Courts are there not as a kind of, again, it's not like a software program where anybody can make any argument and get away with murder, or any lawyer can be disingenuous and say, well, I'm just representing my client. Courts are there mainly to be reasonable, to make sure society sort of stays towards the center, that people don't get away with murder or get away with schemes that everybody knows are cynical. Instead, they're now forums inhabited mainly by people gaming the system, trying to figure out ways to get rich, whether it's lawyers or others, using litigation, and the judges let them get away with it.
As I read The Death of Common Sense, I was so intrigued with it and wanted to say to you, that's why I called you and invited you here as soon as I had read it. All right, where do we go now? Because that trust, that faith that obviously is so basic to the common sense that you miss, we don't have that trust. We don't have that faith. Right. We don't believe in authority. How do you see this ever turning around as we get larger and larger?
First of all, first I'll give you the abstract answer. The abstract answer is that you need systems of accountability, from the teacher to the principal to the superintendent to a politician, that are relinked. Today, because of all the legal rules, no one can do anything about any other person in the chain of it. They are unlinked.
You mean someone who can fire?
Yeah, absolutely. Get rid of someone or do whatever is required when they're not doing the job properly, or when the school is not teaching the children, up and down that chain. And that requires, among other things, an idea of accountability in which you hold people accountable for how they are doing, rather than what we have today as a system of defensive accountability, if you will, which is where you have to comply with all of these rules before you do anything. For example, all the rules having to do with public integrity basically assume that everyone's a crook and make everyone fill out lots of forms, comply with all these detailed requirements. Most of the people wasting their time doing that are honest, like most people. But nonetheless, the other day I ran into someone who had just finished a conversation with a campaign manager having a debate over whether the chicken would be in bite sizes or full pieces at a campaign fundraiser, because of a rule that said if it's in full pieces, you have to record it and make it part of the campaign contribution. But if it's in bite sizes, it qualifies as hors d'oeuvres, and therefore it doesn't fall into this legal network. That's absurd. While in the meantime, people are collecting millions of dollars from Indonesians. We're having grown-ups talk about whether the chicken is in bite sizes or not. What we need to do is go to a system where we hold people accountable for where they're raising their money and how they're doing it, not the size of the pieces of chicken, which is what we have in this country today.